A very, very good evening. Well, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. Thank you for joining us as another week kicks off. Another week in which I'm still limping along on one leg after managing to snap my Achilles tendon, which is both bad and good. Bad because it cuts down on the amount of wine I'm allowed to drink as I recover, but good because it's given me plenty of time to sit at home, catch up on some reading, and catch up on some just some goings on in the world of wine, and also today spend a bit of time catching up on my two guests today, because I've got two really interesting guests. They're not just winemakers, but also people who've got their own rich background in the world of wine, and two very cool labels which we celebrate today. Those labels are Paserene and Beau Constantia. Those guests are Martin Smith and Megan van der Merwe, and they will be joining me very shortly as part of what is a busy week for Dan Really Likes Wine, as well as celebrating this evening, as well as the weekly magazine show coming out a little later on this week. We'll be doing a very special show on Thursday with Christian Eads and the team from WineMag. The new prescient report is coming out. What are we celebrating? Well, I'll tell you a little later on in the show, but do put that in the diary for Thursday evening, the chance for some more award winners. And there are award winners all over the place at the moment. We heard on Thursday last week from all four of the gold medalists in the Concours Mondial Sauvignon Blanc out of Portugal, where Melu Lambert, also one of the guests, was a judge. And wasn't it fascinating that all four of these South African Sauvignon Blancs to receive gold medals were barrel fermented? They all had a touch of wood to them, the Blanc Fumé style. What does it say about Sauvignon Blanc? Well, Melu gave her thoughts. If you missed the show, go back and have a look at it. But it suggests that the world of Sauvignon Blanc is both in an exciting space, but also a rather diverse one. And we'll talk about Sauvignon Blanc, I'm sure, this evening, because Sauvignon Blanc is one of the calling cards of Constantia. And that, needless to say, is where Beau Constantia comes from. What makes it special besides Sauvignon Blanc? What makes France light up? Well, Martin and Megan will tell us just a little later as we introduce them and their respective wine stories. Right now, though, before we say hello to our guests, let's catch up on some news from the world of wine. First of all, I got to start on a light note. A big thank you to my good friend, the Joburg foodie. I think it's actually the Cape Town foodie now, the South African foodie. He's all over the place. How do we put this delicately? He's not always the biggest fan of Sauvignon Blanc. To be fair to him, he's a very big fan of good Sauvignon Blanc, but the moment you go a bit too green, a bit too acidic, then the smile vanishes and he's off to find something else. And so the celebration of the Joburg foodies version of Sauvignon Blanc from last Friday, which was International Sauvignon Blanc Day. Something tells me that isn't an entirely authentic Sauvignon Blanc, but I can't pick exactly what it is. Answers on the back of a box of wine to the Dan Really Likes Wine seller, if you will. So that was Sauvignon Blanc Day last Friday. We did have a lot of fun. Cabernet Sauvignon in the news, the Finlaysons. And you've got to run through the list of them. There are so many making up the backbone of the South African wine industry. This is David Finlayson's tribute to the GS66, that George Spiess wine that's fairly mythical. Did he really make it? What was it really all about? Jancis Robinson loved it. It got all sorts of accolades. It's regarded by many as the finest wine we've ever made. And this is David Finlayson paying tribute to it, and clearly doing so rather well, because at the Concours International de Vin, the gold medal for Cabernet Sauvignon, the world's best Cabernet Sauvignon, went the way of David Finlayson. Congratulations, Dave. It's been a couple of years since we had David on the show. We are hoping to have him and the rest of the family. It'll be about a 7-hour show if we have all of the Finlaysons on with us, but look out for that. I think that's coming up during June. And then your last chance to grab a ticket for this. This is happening on Thursday, 6 o'clock. It's the Pick and Pay Winemakers Table virtual tasting at Warwick, from Warwick Wine Estate. Very simple to do. You buy your ticket, you get get the wine and the ingredients stitched up. And don't get nervous, there are simple ingredients and you have a masterful chef helping you to put them together. So by the end of the hour, as well as getting to listen to me for a while, I'll be your host online. You'll also get Jonathan, our chef, plus JD, the winemaker at Warwick, running you through those wines, running you through the food, explaining how they work together, and leaving you not just with an appreciation for some fine wine from Warwick Estate in Stellenbosch, but also the wherewithal to put together some rather nice canapes that'll dazzle your next dinner guests when they come around. Tickets at Web Tickets, the Pick and Pay Winemakers Table virtual tasting with Warwick. I'll be your host there on Thursday. If you haven't got tickets, grab them now and look forward to seeing you online on Thursday. Okay, let's jump into this evening's show and the excitement it brings with us as we welcome both Constantia and Franschhoek to Dan Really Likes Wine, and do so with great pleasure. Martin Smith, Megan, welcome. Lovely to have you both on the show.
How's it?
Well, thanks for having us. Man.
Yeah.
And I see two winemakers with big smiles. Megan, I suspect part of that smile is you've managed to catch your breath a little after the longest harvest in the history of the world ever, and are now back on your feet.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a turbulent ride this year. I think we've all been searching for answers, and I think we've all grown into far more experienced winemakers than we were 3 months ago. We finally pressed our last tank of Petit Verdot, as well as a little tank of Syrah last week Thursday. So I'm fresh off the boat. We've just finished. I've just had my first proper weekend, which is always a little bit weird. And now we get to do that awesome thing where we get to have all the wines safely in barrel. Mallows are slowly ticking away. And our soils are coming alive at the same time with germinating seedlings for the cover crop. So we get to now, I guess, just sit back and reflect.
We had a couple of shows on the harvest of 2022. We spoke to the team down at Royale about their sense of how the year had gone. But what's your personal feeling now that you've had a little bit of a gap in terms of how you think 2022 is going to shape up for you?
So for me, a very, very interesting vintage. I think these vintages that are weird and wacky are always the ones that, keep us most present and keep us on our toes. It was difficult, but can't be compared to vintages like 2020 where we didn't have staff or the rest of the things. So with careful planning, I think you could pull off a pretty cool vintage. We obviously had a very, very wet winter, a little bit warmer than usual, but still filling up the soil reserves to levels that we needed, and with enough cold units to break dormancy. Then came spring, which was very cold. I mean, it was snowing for the third year in a row now on Table Mountain, which is pretty much right behind me, on the 28th of August, and sort of chilled throughout the period into spring, which is where in the beginning to mid-September we would start seeing bud breaks. So bud break was delayed, and not only was it delayed with a really full water profiles and the soils being quite cold and wet, we saw that especially with the internode lengths that our initial growth was really, really slow. So yeah, very cold, very, very late spring. And by that stage, I think we calculated our vintage was about 7 to 10 days late. Then came obviously October, where we had some heat, a lot of water, and something strange that's been happening in Cape Town over the last couple of years, which is pretty high humidities. So with that, we started, doing a lot of suckering and removing a lot of shoots and things to create a healthy microclimate for flowering. And then, I guess just before flowering properly kicked off, we had a little bit of hail and a lot more rain, which in hindsight taught me that maybe I should save the suckering until that bit of the year is over. And November came with more heat and wind. So I think the sort of earlier budding varieties did really well, but that we did eventually have some problems with fruit set in the later budding varieties, such as our Cabernets. And then, Jan came, which was very weird after the wet winter to experience the amount of heat waves that we experienced in short cycles with sort of cold days in between those heat waves. And, even though vineyards are drought-resistant plants and they actually prefer environments in which they're slightly stressed, your actual heat waves do something completely different. The plant perspires faster than it can actually take water from the soil profile. So it starts taking back what it's just given to the grapes. And by taking water from the grapes, you end up losing a little bit of acidity, as well as you change your flavor profile. So that was something interesting to deal with in the cellar. And I think that, eventually we're going to have a vintage that is going to be a little bit more plump, a little bit more round, a little bit more opulent than a nervy, highly acidic, highly phenolic vintage that we had in 2021. And then I guess from February through April, it was just carefully managing fungal diseases. We put down 4 more sprays than we've put down in any other year. But it was just basically about having your finger on the trigger, working really hard in the vineyard to ensure that you have good fruit to preserve in the cellar, and then taking it from there.
Sounds like you've been rather busy and doing rather a lot of work. Which of course winemakers do have to go through during all of that time, seeing everything play out. Do you get a sense that there is a bit of change to the way Beau Constantia in general is looking? Is there a bit of a climate change coming in? Is there something that's going to be more longer term, or was this just a bit different as a one-off for a vintage?
I mean, look, I think at Beau Constantia specifically, because we farm against these really steep northeast-facing slopes that are also your warmer slopes, we experience everything I think far more strongly than some of our neighbors. And I think it's just shown us in the sort of 5 years where we headed into a really bad drought, and now sort of an opposing 5 years where we're doing the opposite. That the differences between our cold periods and our warm periods are becoming larger, and I think that in that way weather patterns are becoming a little bit more erratic, and it's becoming harder for us to plan based on previous weather reports or previous data analyses. So I can't doubt the fact that the weather is changing, that climate patterns are changing, and that more than ever we need to spend time in our vineyards to ensure that we can, adapt with the changing environment.
Just one of the many challenges you face as a top winemaker. I want to know more about the story of Megan, but we'll come back to that in a second. Let's jump over to Martin over in Franschhoek. We've got a summary there, Martin, of what Constantia is looking like for 2022. How have you felt this harvest has gone? And what are your thoughts on the wine you'll be producing as a result?
Dan, so this year so far, we as you know, Paserene sourced from 3 different sites. So we have Tulbach and Franschhoek and Elgin, and they're very different from each other. So the wines that's from Tulbach is definitely in a hotter area. But because we produce a Cabernet Sauvignon there, that they are quite late. So yeah, we've also been pressing last week our last little bit of Petit Verdot, but it's looking exceptional. So, as you know, that this year, and it seems to be all of the even years are definitely the years that's wetter, and they're definitely going to be wines with a lot more finesse. So for Paserene wines, we definitely focus a lot more on power. So we have a lot of concentration and quite some bigger and more tannic wines. This year it will definitely be something that's got a little bit more finesse and a little bit more feminine in many ways.
Well, for you as a winemaker, I suppose there are 2 sides to that. When you're bringing in grapes from different areas, on the one hand, you've got backup if something doesn't go quite according to plan, or you've got the strengths of the different areas to pick on rather than any of the weaknesses or areas where it hasn't gone quite so well. But you've also got to try and keep an eye on all these different spaces and make sure that you know exactly when they're at the time to pick. Make sure you keep an eye on how they're developing, and really keep juggling a few balls at the same time.
Yeah, that's correct. So we I spend a lot of time in my bakkie traveling to different sites. So yeah, definitely you have to do. For our top range, I don't allow myself to interblend the 3 territories, but for the elements range we can. So yeah, then you can hide stuff and all that. But no, so after a while you kind of know what's going where and how the vineyards, you have like an intimate affair with all of them. So you know what you're working with. And then I can definitely tell you that this year is definitely going to be exceptional for quality, as far as just from a more like finessey kind of way. But yeah, definitely different than any other year. Last year we had a lot of rain, so this year we also had a lot of rain to work with. But it changed, and it was definitely a lot more in the springtime. So yeah, it's something to see. Like, we'll see how when everything finishes up mellow and we sulfur them, and then we can see how they sit.
You'll be fairly well prepped to manage the differences and to ensure that the Paserene brand continues to not just keep its current supporters, but make new ones. Because it's not just you who has the winemaking DNA. There are, now 3 generations of the family who've been making wine?
Yeah, my grandfather was the first one. So his farm was in Paul, next to Laborie, and then my father, he was the winemaker for Ashton, and then now me, and then my boy definitely spent a lot of time with me, and he's only 2.5 years old now, but he spends a lot of time in the vineyard and in the winery with me. So he definitely seems like he is excited to take on the burden of making wine.
2.5, that would give him 10.5 years to make up his mind, because you were 13 when you decided you were going to be a winemaker.
Yeah, me and my buddy made some wine from afdak, like an awning system with some rootstock. Yeah, that was 13 years old. So we made something especially awful. Like, it was horrible. We made it and we put it in a Coke bottle, and then we went on holiday, and when it came back, it exploded. Obviously at that time we didn't know how to add any sulfur or anything like that. So it was quite a unique combo of Constantia Metallica rootstock. So yeah, exciting.
This is becoming a bit of a trend. We had Artie Bardenhorst on the show last week, and he was talking about, I think he made his first wine when he was 11, and that was also absolutely undrinkable. But clearly, from such beginnings, grow great winemakers. So what about you, Megan? 13 years old, were you busy preparing your first wine?
No, not at all. Unlike these guys, I didn't have my stars mapped out for me. I sort of just, slipped right into the tank. So I think, I turned 18, I finished school. I was tasked with the impossible question that most 18-year-olds, I think, get, and that is what you're going to do for the rest of your days. And at that stage, I really wanted to go and travel, because, that's what we were doing. And the parents just said, absolutely not. You're going to university. Even if you do sort of a first year of a general BSc, see how it goes and figure out what you want to do from there, and then do your traveling. So I sort of dragged my feet into a general BSc. I think I ended up, doing chemistry and polymer sciences, which is something I can't imagine myself to do today. And what started as a clever diversion of responsibility, I heard that there was a class at Stellenbosch University, or a degree where you could drink wine during class time, and that this mostly happened on Friday afternoons. So I decided that would be the first year of university for me. And even though, I thought that it was a fun game of pre-drinks at the time, it absolutely ended up consuming me. And I remember being in my first wine class with Kathy Marston doing Wines of the World, and just absolutely drowning in astonishment, learning that wine is this incredible thing that combines, philosophy, nature, art, science, and all of these different elements, with the eventual hunt for balance between wine, how the world works. I just couldn't get enough of it. So I ended up sticking through doing viticulture and enology, and then thereafter was going to start doing a business degree at UCT, and my fingers, I guess, were sort of getting really itchy as all my friends were doing harvests everywhere. I reached out to Beau Constantia at that stage in 2015, which feels like light years ago, and basically offered some free labor while I was doing my studies. Justin, who was doing a winemaking service for them at the time, invited me to do a harvest with them at Constantia Glen Cellar, where they provided Beau Constantia with the winemaking service. And then, yeah, long story basically wrapped up. I ended up becoming the winemaker here in 2019 after doing a couple of stints abroad and the rest of it. And yeah, we haven't looked back since.
Winemakers always talk about their influences. Often with our South African winemakers, we find it's other South African winemakers, and understandably so. But you point to a Californian. I think it was Justin Smith who you mentioned as being somebody who really inspires you as a rock star of winemaking. But what's he done to really catch your eye?
Oh man, I mean, I think that Justin Smith's philosophy in winemaking, this guy also basically started like Martin and Artie and the rest of them at about 13. The parents had a wine farm, and he just started sort of experimenting in really small batches. And I think that we're in South Africa, we are pretty academic winemakers that go to university or go to Altenburg and sort of use our learnings along the way. He was a guy that really just started making wine out of curiosity. And I think that, you can travel all the way around the world and learn very similar things from very different winemakers. But for me, it was just absolutely eye-opening how in tune he was with everything that was happening in his vineyards, how in tune he was with everything that was happening in his cellar, and how I think he's been the only winemaker that I've really worked with that makes every single decision just because of his palate. So I think that was really cool, and I learned some gnarly tricks from him.
It was clearly a great partnership, and it's led in no small part to the winemaker you are today. Yeah. Partnership also been really important for you, Martin, out in Franschhoek, and the story of Paserene, because this is you meeting somebody who also had an interest in wine. It was from that, I suppose, initial conversation and a few conversations thereafter that the Paserene brand was born.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time in the United States. So I back in 2001, I went overseas and into the United States and worked a harvest there. And then the owner of the estate at Constantia Winery asked me to stay on. And after that, it developed into something that's been with me for. I've made wine in the United States for about 10 years. I finished out at Newton Vineyard, so they're a winery that's owned by Louis Vuitton, and then after that, I started working with Villafonte. So it's the winemaker for Villafonte was about seven years, and then in 2013. So while I was working with Villafonte, I decided that I want to start doing my own thing. Back in 2015, my partner he came and then he asked, like, listen, what do you think? Like, I'm interested in investing into the wine industry, and what do you think? You want to join me? And then I said, yeah, let's start. I'm like, I already got two vintages under the belt for Paserene, and then from there on we walked this road together. So he's an incredibly kind and good-hearted person. He's in mining, and so from now on we are bound in Paserene.
So you and Ndebe Mareda have struck up this remarkable partnership. You come from a luxury background, Louis Vuitton, and onto Villafonte, which is a rather neat segue in terms of the image of particular brands. How has the image of those brands, the approach to making wine for a place owned by Louis Vuitton, making wine for Villafonte, fed into the vision of what you're creating at Paserene?
It's exactly the same. Like, I definitely I can see what the relevance is of working with something that where there's a lot of resources and there's a lot of things to work with. So we at Newton we focused on the highest of quality, and even with Villafonte we didn't miss a beat with that. So the amount of attention to detail that Mike and Zelma and Phil put towards Villafonte is amazing. Like, you will not. So like, everything is just calculated and recorded and all of that, and that's definitely the ethos that I took over to Paserene as well. So like, we make very small batches of very high-end wine, and we spend a lot of effort on creating something that we truly believe in. So yeah, so that's it's almost for me a carbon copy of them. The areas are different, but I definitely feel that we have something that's quite similar in style and in quality.
But of course, with your own more particular handprint, having a slightly greater control to exert of it. And we have the Paserene wine. We're going to talk about them in just a moment. Let me head back to Megan, though. And Megan, this actually now all makes sense. It's starting to come full circle. I had a message from a good friend of mine, Sanani Mangisa, the former South African women's hockey goalkeeper, who said she enjoyed a particularly riotous evening at a dinner at the home of a mutual friend, which would explain the kind of person, Megan, who might perhaps, in front of a large number of important wine people, fall into a tank of Chateauneuf du Pape.
Yeah, how I made it out of that day unfired and able to budget for the rest of my French trip was a pretty crazy one. So we were busy transferring wine, and in France, you know, you work in these little caves where you walk into the guy's back of his house or into his backyard. And there's a simple garage that looks like my grandfather's shed used to look, filled with tools and things. And then there's a little trap door, which you go through, and all of a sudden, you know, it's basically Narnia. And there's a really cool cellar that just extends all the ways below the town. And, you know, it's impossible to hear the friend upstairs that is, you know, telling you that they're sending wine through this tiny hole in the ground to where you are downstairs. And there's no technology in terms of, I guess, that we have here and communicating from above ground to below ground. We even had a little string and cups that we tried to communicate with because we were so desperate to stop making these things overflow. And things got messy, and a pipe got stuck to the bottom of a tank, and I tried to lean into the tank to remove it and burn out the pump. And long story short, I ended up swimming in thousands of liters of Grenache, and I think that that might be why it is my favorite grape today. I haven't been able to get enough.
We have it on good authority here, Megan, that there were 8 different people who tried very hard to get you out, but you fought them all off extremely bravely.
We don't talk about that part. Yeah, no, it was a terrible mistake.
Of course it was. We'll keep telling everyone that. Time in France gives you many, many things. Amongst them, a look at part of the winemaking world which is pretty specific in terms of what you can make where. And that's one of the huge differences between South Africa and France. We make lots of different wine in lots of different places. We are though guided, and I think increasingly so, by certain areas having certain calling cards. And just in the last couple of weeks, there's been another strong reminder from the Constantia Wine Valley of the strength of Sauvignon Blanc. And it certainly is a strength of Sauvignon Blanc. And across Constantia, there are many fine, fine examples. How important is it for Constantia, for Stellenbosch, for Franschhoek, for our different wine regions, do you think, to have that kind of leading grape? And does it make it a little bit difficult on the flip side to promote some of the other grapes that you might be really good at, in some cases even better at a particular estate, when there is this big calling card of, you know, we are Sauvignon Blanc or another grape?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. It's a difficult question. And I think what's important to note when we make these decisions as regions that put our hats on a certain variety or a certain blend or a certain focus or whatever it might be, I think it's just important to, you know, not do the reverse of marketing myopia, where it's a decision made by, you know, a marketing team without chatting to the guys that are working in the vineyards, seeing what works. And you know, I just think that I sometimes fear that we're moving away from locality and terroir and sometimes trying to you know, force I guess a narrative around a specific variety in certain regions. And I think that in Constantia it's an interesting one. I think Sauvignon Blanc is incredibly important to us. Constantia, I mean, we might be the oldest wine growing region in the Southern Hemisphere, but we only make up 0.4% of the entire South African wine growing landscape. So we're 421 hectares in total. And out of that, you know, half of our total surface area is planted to Sauvignon Blanc. So undoubtedly, Sauvignon Blanc is an incredibly important grape variety to all of us. But beyond that, I think that, Constantia does a couple of really cool things. I think we have a couple of different pillars. So we obviously have the Constantia sweet wines. We have our Sauvignon Blancs. We have our sort of, I hate saying Bordeaux style reds. We have our Constantia reds that are mainly focused on some of the Bordeaux red varieties. And then we have our, which is in my opinion, something that we put our hats on at Beau, our Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blends. So I think from a point of what we've planted, Sauvignon Blanc is incredibly important to all of us. I think all of the winemakers in the Constantia Valley are absolute Sauvignon Blanc nerds. I think that the South African wine landscape is quite flooded by Sauvignon Blanc, and that our wines are very different from the other Sauvignon Blancs that you find in the South African landscape, just from a point where, I think South Africans are used to Sauvignon Blancs coming out or being released before any other variety in the market in the same vintage year. I think that sometimes the Sauvignon Blancs in South Africa are louder on the nose and that they don't maybe have all of that personality on the palate. And I think that, that's something that we've tried to enforce in Sauvignon Blanc because people started expecting certain characters when they order a Sauvignon Blanc, such as, your freshly cut grass and the rest of the things. And I think that what Constantia does really well is that we produce these very complex, very introverted Sauvignon Blancs that don't, unless they, start really aging, jump out of the glass with massive volatility. I think that they are incredibly elegant, but that when you really pay attention, you get to do, as Salvador Dali said, savor secrets. And that is because we have the cool climate that forges incredible acidity. We have the close proximity to the cold Atlantic Ocean. We're flanked on three sides. That gives us, all of that salinity. I know we're not allowed to use the word minerality anymore, so I'm going to use salinity. And then I think beyond all of that, we have a bunch of producers that are just, mad in love with Sauvignon Blanc, and I think that it is a completely underrated variety because of the style in which it has been made as a wine that is enjoyed in masses. And we think that we have a different narrative or a different story to tell around Sauvignon Blanc, and that we can show it in a different light. And even though we are really, really small compared to the rest of the giants in the country that produce Sauvignon Blancs, we believe that we bring something different. So it's been really cool to delve into, our own minds and to have our own conversations and do our own studies around why we think as a region we should focus on a variety such as Sauvignon Blanc, whether it be straight Sauvignon Blanc or what is my personal favorite are Sauvignon Blanc Semillon blends.
I'm really glad you've brought that up, partly because our discussion on Sauvignon Blanc on Thursday last week spoke a lot about wooded Sauvignon, and it broadened, I think, the discussion on Sauvignon Blanc, which can be a bit one-dimensional in terms of what people think of a Sauvignon Blanc. But you also mentioned wine, which is part of the range that Martin makes. Before we introduce that range, though, a quick question, Martin, along the lines of the one I have just asked Megan. If we think of Constantia immediately, we think about Sauvignon Blanc. We head up to Himalaya, and we're thinking Pinot Noir and Chardonnay straight away. There are loads of wines in Stellenbosch, but cabs and big red blends do often headline the conversation. Is there for you a varietal that stands out that Franschhoek either has made its own or should be looking at making its own?
I think definitely from my part is Chardonnay, and then also Semillon. So those two do very well. The soil here is, as you know, it's quite sandy, so it's quite light. And I believe that if you don't overbear the vineyards, then you can make a world-class Chardonnay and Semillon in Franschhoek area. We've done so, and then every year I'm just so super surprised about what the quality is that can come from here. So yeah, definitely. I think Chardonnay and Semillon, and especially Semillon Gris would be fantastic varietals to grow here.
Interestingly, you have a Chardonnay, but with grapes from Elgin. We'll talk about that in a moment. I want to go into the Semillon discussion and help me out with some education, first of all, because Semillon, from being a very quiet and if not unknown, then little spoken of grape not that long ago, is undergoing a huge resurgence. And so there will be people who are asking a question, which I asked not that long ago. Okay, Semillon, Semillon Gris, is it the same thing? Are they different? If so, why? Give us a little Semillon understanding, if you will.
I'm not a professional in that. I just, like, the first time I walked into that vineyard, and I saw like this, the one day it was green grapes, and then the next day it had this kind of like pinkish like hue to them. So it was definitely the one. And it was quite a surprise. So we put it in tank and fermented it, and alas, it was like a completely white wine coming out of it. So yeah, fantastic. So let's say it's a very, very unique varietal, and then it's very exciting to work with it as well.
And it's one which you have used in the first of the wines that we're having a look at here. It is the Shiner. Am I right in saying that's Martin Smith on the label, with a bit more hair and that chiseled upper body and six-pack?
No, it's not. So you see, the funny thing about this whole thing is that we, in the first year, I think it was back in 2013, I made 2 barrels of wine, and then I topped it up with some Merlot and all that. I didn't have any money to put any label on it, and so I spoke to my designer friend Rob Tyler to listen. I told him, like, dude, I have no money. Can you create something that I can spray paint on the bottle? And then I always liked the image of Brad Pitt in Fight Club, and then that was the first one. So he created something like, it's quite unique because it has to sit on the whole stencil, to have to kind of shape it and bend it so it fits on the bottle, and then we can spray paint it. And then after a while, I said, this looks a little bit too much like Brad Pitt, so I don't want him to sue me or anything like that. So we changed, and then we found another image of a movie called Warrior, and we had the image of Tom Hardy, actually. So I told him, okay, like, let's do that. Let's get him on it, so it's gonna look better. It doesn't look like Brad Pitt, and then just change him slightly so that he doesn't look exactly like Tom Hardy, and then he came up with that image. So it's a very unique brand, so it fits in quite well with what it is, and so it's definitely not me. Although I would like to look like that someday. Maybe I can lose a couple of 10 kilograms or so.
All right, so not Martin outside the bottle, certainly Martin inside the bottle, the working man's champion. Tell me about the name, and tell me about this, 80-odd% Sauvignon, 20% or just under Semillon Gris. Tell me about the name and about the wine.
Okay, so in the United States, a wine that doesn't have a label on it is called the Shiner. So I wanted, so obviously, as you know, that's not really a label, so it was kind of like a Shiner. And then I kind of played around with the word, and it came forth like it's also like a wine with a fighting man on it. So it's made for it's more like a blue collar wine. So you can for the working man, and that whole image of masculinity and everything on it. So that's how the whole thing got created.
All right, so that is the working man. I really love it. It's very striking. I actually saw a bottle of this. I had lunch at Embark in Parkhurst yesterday, and Lisa De Beer had some of this in stock. It definitely catches the eye with its minimalist look. It's one of 2 wines I've got here with me. Also very minimalist, but a very different kind of design. And there we go. That might actually be Stephanie on the front there. That's the Paserene Chardonnay. Give me the label here and the thoughts behind that. And then your Elgin Chardonnay. You've just been telling me how wonderful Chardonnay is in Franschhoek, Martin, and now you're making it from Elgin.
Well, you kind of asked me what I think about the Franschhoek, so I think that Chardonnay kind of fits well in Franschhoek, but it also fits very well in Elgin. So yeah, that is a very unique wine. So she's like the protagonist of the whole Paserene range. As you know, that all our wines are very much focused on the arts, and I think I'm kind of an artistic person, so I worked with various artists to create these labels, and I created that wine. It was like after my time in the United States, I wanted to make something that's truly like almost like a Californian Chardonnay. And I know that it's not the best image for Chardonnay in the world, but when you taste a true Californian Chardonnay, then like with all its power and might, and it's quite something remarkable. So like, and obviously I cut my teeth in Californian wines, being a young winemaker there, and for a very long stint there. So I came back to South Africa, and I wanted to make something in that style. And I went first to the Barlows at Simonsburg, because at that time the Five Soldiers was the wine that I really loved and wanted to covet. Then Simon told me, like, listen, you can't have any of our Chardonnay fruit, but we have this vineyard up in Elgin, and we don't know yet what it's going to be, but if you want to buy some of that fruit, we have a contract for about 10 tons. If you want to buy 5 tons, and then we'll see. And so I made the wine the first year, and created something that it was. I must tell you, when I opened the bottle, I didn't exactly know what it was. It's definitely not a Californian Chardonnay. So I took it to Michael Friedjon, and he was my most revered critic. And then and I asked him, like, what do you think of this wine? And he was completely in love with the wine. So from there, and I said, okay, shot. So now we got the style of wine. Then I had to create the label, and I started working with various of artists on my other Paserene wines. And then there's one girl called Carmen Ziervogel, and I asked her, like, taste the wine and then create the image of a lady for me. And it's well, give it as much thought as while you taste the wine, what do you see and all that. And she came up with the image of this, the image that's on the label now. And then she wanted to add color to her. And then I immediately said, like, this is not going to work. Just keep it with the basic pencil sketch, because that is just perfect the way the wine is. And then it's fragile, and it's also the image got a little. She's not she's kind of aloof, but also quite powerful. So that in the end was what we came up with and we're stuck with, and it was quite a striking label, or it is, and then so forth is so fitting for the wine.
It is like its predecessor, both minimalist and striking at the same time, and reflects a wine where I think it's about 30% new oak. It's got a lovely balance of the wood there, framing the wine and framing the fruit rather than overwhelming it. So two lovely whites. Let's go over to Constantia and keep on that theme of white. Tell me, Megan, who is Cecily, and how have you pulled off quite such a fine Viognier in Constantia?
Oh man, so Cecily is the owner of Beau Constantia, husband Pierre. So Pierre is our Sauvignon Blanc Semillon, and then Cecily is our Viognier. It was also the maiden wine release for Beau Constantia, and some of the first vineyards planted on the property. And I think what ended up just being a grape variety that Cecily loved to drink ended up being something that so perfectly suited the soils and the climate of the area that they planted it in. And I was quite nervous starting at Beau Constantia making Viognier, because drinking a lot of like Viogniers from South Africa, it really hasn't been a variety that I've I guess really enjoyed. Sort of from the perspective of you might as well pull up at the garage and say, fill up with unleaded. And it being super volatile, usually a little bit flabby, quite bitter. Viognier is a very difficult grape to grow, because it just ripens so quickly, and you can go from something that is your worst Sauvignon Blanc nightmare to something that is basically cracking the lid on a tin of paint really quickly. And I think that when I went to Chateauneuf-du-Pape in 2018, I traveled up to the Condrieu, and I tasted some really beautiful Viogniers, and I realized that it was a lot cooler out there or up there than I really realized it was. And I think coming back to Constantia and starting at Beau in 2019, I felt a little bit more comfortable about this cool climate site for Viognier, which essentially just makes my job a lot easier. It's actually what I have in my glass right now. I didn't know we weren't drinking wine on the show, so I'm just here, my ace, doing all of our work. I think that basically for a Viognier in a cool climate, you just extend or slow down that ripening period. So you as a winemaker or a viticulturist have a lot more time to basically decide when the perfect picking date is. And I think that Viognier is a variety that really shows I think it shows its hand in terms of whether you missed the perfect date. And what we have here is we have slow ripening, so obviously a slow a process of developing of these really beautiful Viognier flavors, but at the same time, it ripens so slowly that you really retain your acidity, and you also build a beautiful phenolics that you get to utilize in different styles of what you do when you get to the cellar. And then, once we get to the cellar, basically whole bunch pressed, pretty dirty settled, because hyperoxidation helps you bind out your less stable phenolics. And then, goes to barrel the following day. Very, very old oak and some concrete. And Bob's your uncle. It stays in there for 8 months on the gross lees without being stirred until it is gently filtered before bottling.
There is also a touch of Viognier in the Pas de Nom range, but we're going to have to leave that for another time because we have load shedding at 6 o'clock. Thank you, Tom. So we'll have to have you back on the show soon again, Megan, and talk about that range. Let's jump back quickly so we get to the reds before we wrap up. And a quick look, Martin. I'm looking here at the Midnight by Paserene. Again, I love your labels. There's a lot of time and thought. They look very simple, but there's clearly a lot of time that's gone into them. And in this case, time as well, I'm sure, gone into your Midnight Cabernet Sauvignon. Give me the background of this wine, if you will.
Okay, so the label started with me and my best friend. We went to Indonesia, and then there was this. We went into this bar, and we been surfing a little bit, and been just having a great old time. But then after a while, you get quite tired of drinking beer all the time. So we were sitting in this, and we were kind of in a negative state. And then I looked onto the wall, and there was this image of this little swing there. And underneath that swing, it said, "Never forget to play." And then I thought it was quite fitting to have that for Paserene's second label, because this is in these wines that we are not so serious. So we kind of are more playful and relaxed, and we kind of break down all of our cultivars that we work with to the most basic one. And this is the Midnight is it's a straight cap, and it's 100% from Elgin. And so it's like when I started working with Elgin fruit, I thought that you might get a little bit of a greenery going on, and because for me, I despise pyrazines, but it was not the case. So I spoke to Joep van Almenkerk and to Juris, and then they told me that be careful for that. If you pick it too early, you're going to get a little bit of a tomato leaf character. And then I let the grapes hang for a very long time. So the determining factor for that block was the baboons that ate the grapes. And then every time the farmer called me and said, "Listen, man, you want to pick your grapes because the baboons are just creating havoc in your vineyard." And I said, "No, let it hang," and we picked it. I think at about 25.5. And then fermented it. So then there was no greenness to speak of. So so this is, I think that one you have there is the 2020 vintage, and it's something that creates. It's got a lot of that beautiful cassis character that comes from the Elgin Valley, and it finishes off with some nice minerality and then slate and then also wet pebbles in the background. So we think for that one it's a little bit lightly oak to my side. So but we got it about 30% new oak. And very small production. I think we did only about 3,000 bottles of that.
You do an interesting comparison there on the Cabernet Sauvignon, because you've got a second one. I've got the 2019 here. This is the marathon races I will not be doing for some time, if ever, and a second Tulbach wine, which is the Union. Just before we do wrap up, I do want a quick look at these. Wine out of Tulbach, the contrast between your two cabs, and then what makes your other Tulbach wine stand out here in the Union?
Okay, so definitely there in Tulbach you have something quite different from the one that you have in Elgin. So there is where Elgin is a area that's abnormally cool for this country. So we all suffer a heat wave in Franschhoek and in Tulbach, and then I will phone my friend in Elgin, and he said, "No, it's raining here when it's about just only 90 kilometers away." So it's a complete anomaly. So the ones in Tulbach is the soil is quite intensely like a lot of clay. So in Elgin you get like more of a coffee stone, and in Tulbach you got what they call a Glen Rosa soil. So it's a clay soil it's decomposed shale with like a lot of quartz in it. It creates a wine that's incredibly concentrated. So if you compare a Cabernet that's from Stellenbosch to a Cabernet that's from Tulbagh, the berry sizes will be completely different. So we will have about a 0.7 of a gram per berry. And where you'll find in Stellenbosch like 1.2 grams. So the power to weight ratio it's definitely a lot more in the favor for if you want to create a powerful Cabernet, and that would be for in Tulbagh. So it's that one is 100% new oak. So I use basically just Dinajou and Taranso barrels, and then sometimes in some years I will put in a couple of Mercury barrels. And then also, so if you taste the wine, it's a lot more concentrated, but it's also you won't pick up the oak, so it's very the concentration of the fruit is encapsulated by the oaking of the wines. So yeah, it's completely different. On the label, it's a swallow, and you know that. Paserene is all based on a flying group of birds called, which is swallows, swifts, and martin. So that's why I had that on it. It was painted by a very famous artist. Her name is Lorraine Lutz. At the time when I started working with her, she was not that famous, but now she became quite prevalent in the wine in the art industry. So she's what they call a miniaturist. And then on the second wine, it's called the Union. And then this is where the swallow, which is me, and then the lady, which resembles Mother Nature, would come together, and we created that wine. It's a straight Syrah, and I think it's SH22. It's a vineyard that's been struggling all its life. So the winemaker or the viticulturist that planted the vineyard didn't properly prepare the soil. So these wines struggle so much to create even the 1 or 2 tons they do in per hectare. But in the end, it creates something that is incredibly powerful and very beautiful out of the struggle and the pain of that vineyard. So those are the 2 top wines for Paserene.
Martin Smith, making wines famous for Louis Vuitton, making wines famous for Villefontaine, making wines famous for Paserene, and putting Lorraine Lutz on the map as well. Great miniaturist. He does some rather nice labels as well. 6 o'clock is looming, as is the end of our power. So let's jump back quickly to Constantia. Give me a snapshot on the Stella and the Luca before I ask you one very important question, because I have an issue with you, Megan van der Merwe. But before I bring very quickly, the Stella and the Luca.
So very quickly, which is rough for me. Luca is just, she's elegant and she is fierce. It's a wine that just suits our slopes perfectly. It's made of Cabernet Franc and Merlot. It's a blend that turns out completely differently every year, just because we use neutral vessels again, and we'd like to sort of just provide an entry into the site by making our wines and we're preserving the grapes in the way that we do. And I think that the Cabernet Franc and the Merlot vineyards, Merlot clone MO343, and the Cabernet Franc that go into Luca are probably the 2 only blocks on the farm that we don't have to ever really manipulate in terms of trying to find the perfect microclimate. So it's actually been our easiest kid to raise, and I can understand why the wine has the balance that it does. And then for Stella, Stella's a little wine that we initially only made in very spectacular years. As the Syrah vineyard sort of grew in age, and as we understood Syrah in the Constantia route a little bit better, we started making small bits more of it every single year. It's actually got a splash of about 2% Viognier in the blend, just because it helps with color stabilization and the rest of it. We therefore have sort of 1 foot on in the Rhone and 1 foot in Bordeaux, but as well, we have both feet in Constantia. And for me, it's not about the fact that Syrah and Cabernet Franc shouldn't necessarily grow in the same site, because that's not what happens in France. It's about something that works in our particular little pocket of terroir in Constantia, and I love both wines deeply.
You also have that Bordeaux-Rhone crossover with the final one I want to talk about. You almost got this perfect, Megan. This is the Hayden. It's led by Shiraz. If you take out the Cabernet Franc and swap it for Shiraz, you'd have a Bordeaux blend instead. That lovely spice and power that comes in from the Shiraz you've chosen. My problem with this wine, Megan van der Merwe, is the spelling, Because if it had been Aiden, you have my son. And I could have bought hundreds of cases and never had to worry about buying wine ever again. One little typo, or you would have had 100 points from me.
We might need to do a little bit of label work for you. I'll try and chat to our label printers and see if we can do a little bit of a other variant for you in the future.
Like, we've had plenty of it. It's a lovely wine. And after the third bottle, you can't really tell there's a different spelling. So it doesn't really matter all that much. Guys, sadly, Escom have dictated that we're almost at the end of the show. But it's been an absolute delight. And I look forward to having you both on. It's criminal that this is the maiden appearance, but we'll definitely do plenty more. Martin, it looks like you're having so much fun in this space with Paserene. It's a brand that's still in an early stage of its journey. And then many, many more chapters to be written, and it's just beautiful to look at, as you can see, as is Beau Constantia, where Megan pretends to do work when in fact she's actually just sitting at Chef's Warehouse ordering more food and putting it on the Duprier family account. Guys, thank you both very, very much. 2022 sounds exciting, different, but exciting, so we'll keep an eye out for those particular wines. Good luck putting them all together, and thanks for sharing the time with us on Dan Really Likes Wine.
Cool, man.
Thanks,
cheers. Thanks so much for having us. Yeah.
Cheers, man.
There we go. Martin Smith and Megan van der Merwe, a great pair. And yes, again, this just happens all the time. Such wonderful people, terrific winemakers, and great people to hang out with on the show and talk a little bit about wine. That wraps us up for today. Throwing forward to Thursday, Christian Eads will be joining us, but I cannot tell you who else, because I have been sworn to secrecy by Jax from Wine Magazine, and she's rather fierce. And so I can tell you that we will have some winning wines on. I can't tell you who makes them, because they are the top performers from the latest Wine Mag Prescient reports. All will be revealed technically on Wednesday when the reports come out, but our guests will be revealed to you on Thursday evening as we celebrate more fantastic South African wine. Have a lovely week. Keep drinking great South African wine. Hope to see some of you at our Warwick Winemakers table with Pick and Pay on Thursday night, straight after my show. Until then, have a great week and see you on Thursday. Goodbye. To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.